Heidi by Johanna Spyri. Chapter 1 Alm Opa. The little village of Dorfli was high up in the Swiss Alps. There were mountains all around it. Big, beautiful mountains with snow on them. The nearest mountain was called the Alm. High up on the Alm was a little wooden house. An old man lived there, alone with his 2 goats. People called him Alm Opa. He had quarreled with the people of the village, and now he never spoke to anyone. People told terrible stories about him. When he was a young man, he had lost all his father's money and gone away to a far country. Nobody really knew what he had done there, but in the end, he came back with the son. He got work in Joffrey, and then he married a girl from the village. Her name was Adelheid. Soon they had a child, a little girl. They named her Adelheid too, but they always called her Heidi. Heidi was only a year old when Tobias was killed. He was working in a house and a big piece of wood fell on his head. Poor Adelheid became very ill and died soon after. Now Heidi had no mother and no father. She had a grandfather, Almopa, but he didn't want a child of a year old. So, who could look after Heidi? Adelheid had a sister, Detta, who lived in a small town not far from Dorfli. Detta took the child to live with her. But Detta didn't want to look after Heidi forever. When Heidi was 6, Detta met a German lady. The lady asked Detta to work for her in her house in Frankfurt. Frankfurt is a big city, and Detta wanted to go there very much. But what about Heidi? I'll take Heidi to her grandfather, she thought. He can look after her. So one day in June, Detta brought Heidi back to the office. She walked quickly through the village, pulling Heidi along. She didn't want to answer a lot of questions. But a woman saw her and called out, Detta, is that your poor sister's child? Where are you taking her? To Almopa, said Detta. He must look after her now. I've got work in Frankfurt. What? The woman cried. That terrible old man who never speaks to anyone and never goes to church? What will he do to the poor child? You can't leave her with him. But Detta didn't stop. They went on up the mountain. The sun was hot and Heidi's face was very red. She was wearing all her clothes at once, 3 dresses, one over the other. After 40 minutes, they came to a little wooden house on the mountainside. It had a broken door, and there were holes in the roof. Is that grandfather's house? Cried Heidi. No, his house is higher up, said Detta. That's God Peter's house. Who's God Peter? Oh, he's dead now. His wife and her old mother lived there, and his son. He's called God Peter too. He takes all the goats from the village up the mountain every day. They went on up the Alp, and at last they came to another wooden house. This one was much nicer. An old man was sitting on a seat in front of it. He had a long white beard and hard eyes. Good morning, Almopa, Detta said. I brought you Tobias and Adelheid's child. And what has she to do with me? He said. I looked after her for 5 years. Now you can take her, said Detta. And if the child is unhappy and cries for you, asked the old man. What shall I do then? You must find the answer yourself, Detta said. People call you bad old man, but even a bad old man must look after her own child. Now the old man, leave the child and go. He cried then Heidi, still sad. She had done chapter 2, Grandfather's Father. He sat on board. Heidi walked round. There was a room for the goats, which was empty. At the back were three big old fir trees. She could hear the wind going through them. The sound was like singing, and she stopped to listen. Before going around the house, Grandfather was still in the same place. Heidi went and stood in front of him. What do you want to do? He said at last. I want to see what you have inside the house. Come then, he opened the door. There was only one room in the house, but it was large. In one corner was a big fireplace with a table and a wooden chair near it. In another corner was Grandfather's bed. There was also a big cupboard. It had everything in it that he needed. A few clothes, bowls and plates, bread, cheese and dried milk. He put in Heidi's things which Detta had brought. Heidi looked around the room. Where am I going to sleep, Grandfather? Wherever you want, he said. Heidi noticed some steps in the corner. She climbed up them and found herself in a room under the roof. There was hay all over the floor, and it smelled good. From a window in the roof, she could see the mountains. I am going to sleep here, she called. It's nice here. Come and see how nice it is. I know, I've seen it before, he answered. Heidi made a little bed for herself out of the hay. Then she called Grandfather to bring her some sheets. He had no sheets, but he found some pieces of hard brown cloth. He brought them up and laid them over the hay. It's a lovely bed, Heidi cried. I want to go to bed in it, but it's not night time now. I think we should eat first, Grandfather said, and they went down the steps. Grandfather made the fire burn well. Then he cut a big piece of cheese. He put it near the fire until it was golden brown on all sides. Heidi ran to the cupboard. She got out the bread and two plates and bowls and put them on the table. So you can think for yourself, said Grandfather. That's good. Now where are you going to sit? He put her onto his own chair. The table was too high for her, but the hot cheese and the bread were so good. Then Grandfather filled her bowl with goat's milk. She drank without stopping until the bowl was empty. I've never had such good milk, she said. When they had finished, Grandfather cleaned the goat's house. Then he found four long sticks and cut them so that they were all the same. He took a piece of wood and made four holes in it. Then he stuck the sticks into the holes, while Heidi looked on in wonder. What do you think it is, Heidi? He asked. It's a chair for me, because it's so high. Evening came, and the wind in the fir trees grew stronger. The sound made Heidi very happy. Suddenly, she heard the sound of many feet. The goats were coming down from the mountain, running and jumping everywhere. And Goat Peter was among them, and he was a big, strong boy of 11. They reached the house and went on down the hill. But one white goat and one brown goat left the others and ran to Grandfather. Oh, they are so pretty, Heidi cried. Are they ours, Grandfather? Are they both ours? Yes, yes. Go and get your bowl and some bread. He put the bowl under the white goat and began to milk her. Soon the bowl was full of milk. Now eat and go to bed. Your night dress is in the cupboard. I must look after Snowy and Brownie. The goats followed grandfather into the goat house. Heidi finished her bread and the milk and climbed up the steps to her bed in the hay. Chapter 3. On the Mountain. Next morning, Heidi was woken up by a shout outside. It was Peter calling his goats. She dressed quickly and ran down. Grandfather was leading out Snowy and Brownie. Would you like to go with them up the mountain? He said to Heidi. Oh, yes, she cried. Grandfather showed her a big wooden bowl of water outside the house and told her to wash. He took Peter inside. This is for Heidi, he said. Put it in your bag. He gave him a piece of bread and a piece of cheese. Peter looked at them with round eyes. They were much bigger than the pieces he had for himself. And here's her bowl, said Grandfather. You can milk Snowy for her. The two children set off up the mountain. Peter always took the goats to a place where the grass was very good. It's so lovely here, said Heidi. The grass was very green in the strong sunlight, and there were mountain flowers everywhere. The tops of the mountains had a lot of snow on them. The goats ran about everywhere. Heidi ran from one goat to another, making friends with them. Snowy and Brownie are the prettiest, she said. I know, said Peter. I'll power washes them and keep them nice. He filled Heidi's bowl with milk from Snowy, and she drank happily. Peter got out the bread and cheese, the big bits for Heidi and small bits for himself. Heidi ate some bread and gave a piece to Peter. You can have my cheese too, she said. Peter couldn't believe it. That big bit of cheese all for him? But Heidi put it into his hand and he ate it quickly. Do you go out with the goats every day? Heidi asked Peter. Yes, not in winter. I go to school then. Do you like school? Heidi asked. No, I hate it, Peter said. The afternoon went by, and now the sun was going down. Everything was covered in golden light. Suddenly, Heidi jumped up. Peter, Peter, it's burning. All the mountains are burning, and the sky and the snow all red. There's a great fire. Oh, it's not a fire. It's always like that. It's so beautiful, Heidi cried. Oh, it's going away. Now it's all gone. Oh dear. It will be the same tomorrow, Peter told her, and she was happy again. It was time to go. The children and the goats went down the hillside to grandfather's house. Come again tomorrow, Peter said. He was thinking of Heidi's bread and cheese. Chapter 4. Grandmother. Every day, Heidi went up the elm with Peter and the goats. The weeks went by and she grew brown and strong. Winter was coming and the days began to get cold and windy. When it was very windy, Grandfather kept Heidi at home. She was sorry not to go with Peter, but there were nice things to do at home too. She liked to look at Grandfather while he worked. Sometimes he made things out of wood, and often there were things in the house to mend. Heidi also loved to see him making the cheese from the goat's milk. But most of all, she loved to stand under the old fir trees and hear the wind singing in them. One night it snowed. In the morning, everything was white and beautiful, but they could not even open the door. For nearly a week, they had to stay inside the house. On Sunday, Peter came to see them. They sat by the fire, eating dried meat. How is school? Grandfather asked. Bad, said Peter. I can't learn to read. I'll never learn. Heidi wanted to know all about school and asked him a lot of questions. It was hard for poor Peter to all answer them. At last he said, My grandmother wants to meet you. You must come one afternoon. Heidi wanted to see Peter's grandmother very much. After 2 days, the snow was hard and they could go out. Grandfather got his sledge. He sat on it with Heidi in his arms, and they flew down the hill to go to Peter's house. Come home when it begins to get dark, Grandfather said, and started up the hill again. Heidi opened the door and went in. It was not like Grandfather's house, with nice big room. Here there were 3 rooms, all small and dark, and everything looked old and poor. In the second room, a woman sat mending a coat. It was Peter's coat. Heidi knew it very well. In the corner, an old woman sat spinning. Heidi went up to her and put out her hand. Hello, grandmother. I've come to see you. The old woman took her hand slowly. Are you the old child who stays with Alm Opa? Are you Heidi? Yes, I come down with grandfather on the sled. Heidi said. What? Alm Opa brought you himself? Do you hear that, Brigitte? She said to Peter's mother. They were both very surprised. What does the child look like? The old moon said. She's pretty like Adelheid, Brigitte told her, but she has her father's brown eyes. Heidi was looking round the room. Look, grandmother, the window is broken. It's hitting against the wall. I can't see it, grandmother said, but I can hear it. The house is full of noises. When the wind comes, I wake up in the night and I'm afraid that the house will fall down on top of us and kill us all. But can't you see the window? Heidi said. My child, I can see nothing at all. It's dark in this room, said Heidi. But if you go out into the white snow, it will be light. Come and see. No one can make it light for me, child. When the sun goes down and the mountains are on fire, can't you see that? Heidi cried. No, child. I shall never see the mountains again, grandmother said. This was terrible. Heidi began to cry. She cried, and they could not stop her. At last, grandmother said, Come and talk to me, Heidi. I can't see you, but I like to hear you. Tell me what you do, you and Almopa. I knew him well once. So Heidi talked about things that they did together, and grandmother and Brigitte were very surprised. He's kind to her, they said. She was still talking when Peter came home. How was school today, Peter? Grandmother asked. How was your reading? The same. Oh dear, you are nearly 12 now. I thought you would learn to read. She turned to Heidi. You see that book up there? It has some beautiful songs in it. I can't remember them now, and I want Peter to read them to me. But he can't learn to read. It's too hard for him. Suddenly, Heidi jumped up. Oh, it's getting dark. I must go. Outside, grandfather was waiting for her. He took her in his arm and carried her up the hill. That evening, Heidi told grandfather about Goat Peter's house. Everything is broken, and it moves in the wind and makes a noise. Grandmother is afraid the house will fall down on top of them. But you can mend it for them, can't you, grandfather? Tomorrow? Grandfather didn't speak for a minute. He looked at Heidi and said, Yes, tomorrow. Next day, they went down the hill together. Heidi went into the house and grandfather stayed outside. While Heidi talked to grandmother, he mended the windows and the roof. Grandmother wanted to thank him, but he wouldn't come in. No, he said, I know what you all think of me. Every fine winter day, Heidi went down to see grandma. Sometimes grandfather went too and worked on the house. He mended everything. There was no noises in the night now. Chapter 5. Jetta Come Back. A year went by in the same way, and now another winter was nearly over. All this time, Heidi did not go down to Dorfli. Grandfather went down the mountain sometimes to sell his cheese and to buy bread and dried meat. But he did not do that in Dorfli. He went on to another village. Twice that winter, the Dorfli school teacher spoke to Peter. Tell Al-Opa he must send Heidi to school, he said, but Al-Opa took no notice. And then one day, Detta came up the hill to grandfather's house. I've come to take Heidi, she said. I found a wonderful place for her. It's with some friends of the lady in my house, rich friends. Their daughter can't walk, and she sits all day in a wheelchair. A teacher comes to the house to give her lessons, but she needs a friend to live with her. They want a little girl who is not like the city children. So I thought of Heidi at once. Isn't it a wonderful thing for her? Grandfather was looking angry. No, it isn't. They would change her. I don't want her to be like the fine people in the city. She's better here among the mountains and the goats. Now that I got angry, you won't send the child to school, so she can't read or write. She's 8 years old now and she's known nothing. Well, I say she must go to Frankfurt, and everyone in the village will say the same. They all think I'm right and you're wrong. She's a girl, you know, not a goat. Be quiet, grandfather shouted. Take her, then, and do what you want with her. I won't go, Heidi cried. Oh, come alone, said Jetta. If you don't like Frankfurt, you can come back. Where are your clothes? Can I come back at once? Said Heidi. Yes, yes, said Jetta, taking Heidi's clothes from the cupboard. Hurry, we have to get the train from Manfield. She pulled Heidi out of the house and down the hill. When they came to Goat Peter's house, Heidi said, I must say goodbye to grandmother. No, there's no time. You can bring her something from Frankfurt. Bring her some nice white bread. She can't eat the hard village bread. Yes, that's true, Heidi said. But look, there she is at the window with Brigitta. She's calling to us. What she saying? I can't hear. Data could hear grandmother's words. Don't take Heidi away, Data. Don't take her from us. Data did not answer, but pulled Heidi quickly along. Chapter 6. A New Beginning. In the house in Frankfurt, Clara Seaman was sitting in her wheelchair and sat in her wheelchair every day, all day. and the days were so long. It was evening now. A big woman in a black dress was sitting near her. This was Miss Roma. Clara's mother had died some years before, and now Miss Roma looked after her house. Clara's father was away. He was a businessman, and he was often away on business. Clara's face was white and tired. She always felt tired. The Swiss girl hasn't come, Miss Roma, she said. When is she coming? Just as she spoke, the doorbell rang. A few minutes later, the manservant brought Jetta and Heidi into Clara's sitting room. Miss Roma got up. She stood there, looking down at the child. What's your name? Heidi, she answered in a clear voice. What? That's not a real name. What name did your father and mother give you? I can't remember, Heidi said. Miss Roma looked angry. Jetta said quickly, her name is Adelheid. Miss Roma, I'm sorry, she has never been in a house like this and she doesn't know what to say. You must teach her, Miss Roma, and she's ready to learn. Well, Adelheid is a real name, Miss Roma said. But the child looks very small. You know that Miss Clara is 12. We want a girl of 12 to play with her and to do the same lessons. How old is this child? I'm sorry, Miss Roma. I'm not certain, Data said. I think she's 10 or a little more. I'm 8 now, Heidi said clearly. Grandfather said so. Only 8? Miss Roma cried. 4 years too young. And what have you learned? What books have you had for your lessons? None, Heidi answered. What? How did you learn to read then? I haven't learned to read. You can't read? Good God, the child can't read. Miss Roma cried. Jetta, how could you make this terrible mistake? Oh, there's no mistake, Miss Roma, Jetta said quickly. You wanted a child who is not like the city children. Well, Heidi has grown up in the mountains. She hasn't even mixed with the village children. Now, I'm sorry. I really must go. I'll come to see Heidi again soon. And Jetta ran out of the hall and into the street. Miss Roma was so surprised that she didn't do anything for a minute. And she ran out of the Jetta. Heidi and Clara looked at each other. Heidi and Clara looked at each other. Do you like to be called Heidi or Adelheid? Clara asked. My name's Heidi. I'll always be Heidi. I'll call you Heidi. You know they brought you here to do lessons with me. She laughed. What will Mr. Candida do? When he hears you can't read, he's my teacher. He comes at 10 o'clock and the lessons go on until 12 o'clock. It's so long, but now he must teach you to read. I shall like that. Just then, Miss Roma came back, looking angry. She had not caught Jetta, so Heidi had to stay. It was time for dinner, and the manservant, Sebastian, came to push Clara's chair into the dining room. This was a large dark room with a long white table. Heidi looked at it in surprise. Why were there 10 chairs round the table? And why was Sebastian standing behind them and not sitting down with them? Then she saw a beautiful white bread roll on her plate. She put it on her knee under the table. Grandmother will like that, she thought happily. Miss Rohman had not noticed. She began to tell Heidi all the things she must do and must not to do. But Heidi had got up at 5 o'clock that morning and soon her eyes were shut. So please remember all these things, Adelheid, said Miss Rohman. Clara laughed. Heidi has been asleep for 10 minutes, she said. You must put her to bed. Chapter 7 In Frankfurt. When Heidi woke up, she looked round her in great surprise. She was in a high white bed in a large room full of chairs and tables and cupboards. Then she remembered she was in Frankfurt and this was her bedroom. There was even a wash bowl in the corner full of water, so she washed and dressed. Then she went to one of the high windows and tried to look out. She could only see walls and more windows. She couldn't even see the ground or the sky. They had breakfast in the big dining room and into the sitting room to wait for Mr. Candidate. When he came, Miss Rahma told him all about Heidi. Isn't it terrible? She said. You cannot teach her with Clara. Oh, I don't know, said Mr. Candidate. We shall see. We must begin with ABC. Heidi thought the ABC was very hard. She didn't learn anything that day. In the afternoon, Clara went to bed, and Miss Rahma went to her room. Heidi was free. I'll go for a walk, she thought. I must find some green grass and trees, and I must see the mountains. She went out of the big door and into the street. There was nothing green here. She walked to the next street and the next, but they were all the same. Then she noticed a church at the end of the street. I can go up to the top of the church, she thought. It was very high. I can see all over the town from there. She reached hundreds of stepstones, but she reached the top at last. She looked down. She could see nothing but roofs. No grass, no trees, no mountains. Sadly, she went down again. Then she saw a large black cat by a little room at the side of the church. An old man came out of the room. She's got young ones in that basket, he told Heidi. 6 kittens. Heidi looked. Oh, aren't they lovely? Do you want one? The old man asked. You can have them all if you like. Oh, can I have them for Clara? But how can I carry them? Where do you live? The old man asked. Mr. Seaman's house. Do you know it? It has a dog's head on the door. Oh, I know all the houses round here, said the old man. I'll bring them tomorrow. Heidi could not find a way back. All the streets looked the same, but at last she saw the door with the dog's head and went in. Miss Romer was terribly angry. Where have you been, Adelheid? She cried. It's nearly dinner time. You must never leave the house alone. And you didn't tell anyone, you bad girl. While the girls were having their lessons next morning, Sebastian came in. He had a large covered basket in his hand. It's for Miss Clara, he said. A person has brought it for her. He put the basket down and went away. A few minutes after, the bell in the sitting room rang noisily. He ran to the door. The room was full of kittens. They were running and jumping everywhere, and Heidi was running after them. Clara was laughing happily. Mr. Candidate was looking unhappy, and Miss Rahma was standing on her chair. Take the terrible animals away, she cried. She was very afraid of cats, even little ones. Sebastian caught all the kittens and put them back in the basket. I'll find a nice place to keep them, miss, he said quietly to Heidi before he took them away. The room was quiet again, but no one could think about lessons now. In the evening, Heidi came to talk to Clara. She told her about the church and the big black cat and the old man. You are a strange girl, said Clara. Why did you go up the church? And why did you go out by yourself? I wanted to see the grass and the mountains, Heidi said. Well, there are no mountains here, but there's some grass. Perhaps father can show it to you when he comes home, Clara said. Chapter 8. Heidi and Clara. The days went by slowly for Heidi. Every day was the same. In the morning there were the lessons. Heidi still had not learned to read. She could not learn. It was too hard. Peter had said so. The afternoon was the really bad time. Then Heidi sat alone in her room, doing nothing. There was nothing for her to do. She could not go out, so she sat and thought sadly about home and all the things she loved. The evening was the best part of the day. When she went to the sitting room to talk to Clara, Clara loved to hear her stories of grandfather and the house on the Alp, of Snowy and Brownie, of Peter and his grandmother. I have a grandmother too. She comes to stay here sometimes. You love her. Oh, but I must go home soon, said Heidi. She often said this. Clara looked sad. Well, you must wait till father comes, she said. Then we shall see. One thing made Heidi want to stay longer in Frankfurt. Every day she could get another roll for grandmother. She always took the roll from her plate at dinner and added it to the ones in her cupboard. One day a letter came from Paris, from Mr. Seaman. He was coming home the next week. Miss Rohmer and the servants were very busy in the house, making everything nice. Miss Rohmer noticed Heidi's dress. It was too small and had lost its color. Oh, her clothes like that? I must look in her cupboard, she thought. And then perhaps I can find some old dresses of Clara's for her. She went to Heidi's room while Heidi was with Clara and opened the cupboard. Good God, she cried and hurried to the sitting room. Adelheid, what do I find in your clothes cupboard? A lot of rolls, bread in a cupboard for clothes. What will Mr. Seaman think of you? She went to the door. Tinette, she called. Go and take all the bread out of Heidi's cupboard and throw it away. Heidi ran after Tinette, but she couldn't stop her. She came back to Clara. She has thrown away all my rolls. They were for grandmother. Now she won't have any rolls. She began to cry. It's all right, Heidi, said Clara. I can give you more rolls when you go home, new ones. Those were old and hard. Heidi was still uncertain. Can you give me so many? As many as I have? Of course, more than you have, but do stop crying. Mr. Seaman came home the following evening. He hurried into the sitting room and threw his arms around Clara. The father and daughter was very happy to be together again. Then he turned to Heidi. So this is our little Swiss girl, he said. Give me your hand. Next, Mr. Seaman went to talk to Miss Rohmer. You don't look very happy, he said. Why is that? There's nothing wrong with Clara, is there? I thought she was better myself. Oh, Mr. Seaman, Miss Rohmer cried. We have made a terrible mistake over the Swiss child. Really? What's wrong with her then? Oh, everything, Mr. Seaman. She speaks in the wrong way. She brings animals into the house. She even keeps bread in her clothes cup. I think she's not right in the head. Mr. Seaman went to Clara. He sent Heidi out of the room and said, "Now tell me about Heidi. Why does Miss Rahma think that she's not right in the head? What is all about these animals and bread and in the clothes cupboard?" Clara laughed. She told him about the kittens and the rolls for Peter's grandmother. Her father laughed too. "So you don't want me to send the child away?" he asked. "You are not tired of her?" "Oh no, father. Everything is much better with Heidi here. Strange thing happens, and she tells me nice stories." Mr. Seaman went back to Miss Rohmer. "The Swiss child will stay," he said. "Please be kind to her in every way." Chapter 9. Another Grandmother. Mr. Seaman stayed for 2 weeks and then he had to go to Paris. "But soon, Grandma is coming to stay with you," he told. Clara was excited. "Grandmama is a wonderful person," she said to Heidi. When Mr. Seaman's mother came home, Heidi liked her at once. She had pretty white hair and very kind eyes. Those eyes saw a lot of things. Grandmama noticed everything that went on in the house. The next afternoon, Clara went to bed, as she always did. Grandmama sat with her until she fell asleep, and then she looked for Heidi. Heidi was not in the sitting room or in the dining room. She went to find Miss Rohmer. "Where's the child?" she asked. "I want to know." "What does she do with Clara when she sleeps?" "Nothing," Miss Rohmer said. "She sits in her room. She never does anything useful." "She has to sit alone in her room," cried Grandmama. "Poor child, bring her to me. I have some nice books for her." "Books? What can she do with books? She can't read a word. All these lessons with Mr. Candida and she hasn't learned her ABC." "That surprises me," said Grandmama. "She doesn't look like a fool." "Well, she can look at the pictures. Bring her to my room." When Heidi came in, Grandmama showed her a big book with lovely pictures. Heidi thought that they were lovely. Then Grandmama said, "Now tell me, child, how are you getting on with your lessons? Are you learning a lot?" "Oh no," Heidi answered sadly. "I can't do it. I did that before." "Can't do it? What can't you do, Heidi?" "I can't learn to read. It's too hard." "And how do you know that?" said Grandmama. "Peter told me, and he knows, because he has tried and tried. It's too hard." "Too hard for Peter, perhaps, whoever he is. But listen, Heidi, you must try things before for yourself. I'm sure that you can learn to read if you really try. And do you know what will happen when you have learned? I shall give you this book for yourself." "Oh," cried Heidi, very excited. But Heidi still could not work well in her lessons. She wanted so much to go home, but she knew now that she couldn't tell anybody. "They are all so kind to me," she thought. "How can I say that I want to go away?" Grandmama soon saw Heidi was not happy. "What's the matter, child?" she asked her. "Oh, I can't tell you," said Heidi. "Can you tell Clara about it?" "No, not even Clara. I can't tell anyone." "But there's someone you can tell," said Grandmama slowly. "Go, pray to God, and ask him to help you." Heidi began to look happier. "Can I tell him everything?" "Yes, everything," said Grandmama, and Heidi hurried away. She wanted to begin praying at once. Every evening, Heidi talked to God about her troubles, and now in the lesson time she thought about the lesson. 2 weeks after this, Mr. Candidate came to see Miss Seaman. "A most surprising thing has happened," he said. "I really cannot begin to Heidi has learned to read? Is that what you want to tell me? Yes, that's it, said Mr. Candidate, looking very surprised. And how did you know? And she has learned so quickly and so well. Grandmama went at once to Clara's sitting room. There was Heidi with an open book on her knee. She was reading out a story to Clara. At the dinner table, Heidi found a big book on the table by her plate. It was the book with the beautiful pictures. Yes, it's yours now, Grandmama said. For always, even when I go home? Of course, forever, Grandmama said. Tomorrow we'll begin to read. Chapter 10 Unhappy Days. Every afternoon, while Clara was asleep, Grandmama called Heidi to her room. They talked of many things, and Grandmama listened to Heidi reading. Her reading was getting better and better, but Grandmama noticed that Heidi was looking unhappy again. Something is still troubling you, Heidi, she said. Have you told God about it? Oh, yes, but I don't pray him anymore now because he doesn't listen. What? Said Grandmama. Why do you say that? Because I've asked him for the same thing every day for weeks and he hasn't done it. How can he listen to me? There are so many people in Frankfurt, all praying at once. Oh, Heidi, that's not the way to think of God. Of course, he can listen to everyone at once. He has heard you, and he will help you. But perhaps he will do it in another way. You see, God knows what is best for us. You must go on praying. These words made Heidi a little happier. But soon it was time for Grandmama to leave Frankfurt and go back to her own home. Clara and Heidi were both very sad to see her go. Heidi couldn't read to Grandmama now. So, the next day she began to read a story to Clara. This story was about a little girl and her grandmother. In the story, the grandmother died. Grandmother's dead, Heidi cried. I can't go to her now, and she hasn't had even one roll. It's only a story, Clara told her. It's not your grandmother, you know. But Heidi cried more loudly than ever. She knew the story wasn't true, but perhaps grandmother would die while she was far away. Then Miss Roma came. Stop that terrible noise, Adelheid, she said angrily. If reading a story makes you cry again, I shall take the book away from you forever. Heidi turned white. The book was the dearest thing she had. She never cried again while she was reading. Every night when Heidi went to bed, a picture of the elm came into her head. There was the green hillside with the snowy mountains, the little wooden house, and grandfather himself. Was he even alive? She lay awake for hours, and often she cried very quietly. The weeks went by, but Heidi didn't know what time of year it was. She became thin and lost all the color from her face. Sebastian tried to give her the nicest pieces of food, but she didn't want to eat. She still prayed to go every evening to send her back to the Alps, but now she was losing all hope. Chapter 11 The Ghost. Something very strange was going on in the Siemens house. One morning, Sebastian came down and found the big front door open. A thief has got in, he thought. The servants looked in every room, but nothing had been stolen. That night, Sebastian turned the key in the door very carefully, but in the morning it was wide open again. The same thing happened the day after the day. At last, Miss Roma said, Sebastian, you and John must sit up tonight and see what happens. The two servants waited in a room near the front door, but they had had a big dinner, and by 12 o'clock they were both asleep. John woke suddenly. I heard something, he cried, and ran out of the room. Sebastian heard a shout. Then John came back. I saw it, he said. A white thing on the steps, and the doors open again. All the other servants were afraid when they heard John's story the next day. It's a ghost. There's a ghost in the house, they said. Clara heard the story and became very afraid. So Miss Romer wrote to Mr. Seaman asking him to come home because Clara was in danger. When Mr. Seaman came, he didn't believe the story of the ghost. It must be a person, he said. I'll sit up and catch your ghost. He sent me old friend, Dr. Classen, who was also Clara's doctor. He had been to her house once or twice while Heidi was there. Is Clara ill? The doctor asked when he came. No, she's asleep in bed. I want you to help me catch a ghost. He told the doctor about it. The two men sat in the small room near the front door. They were talking and drinking, and the hours went by quickly. On the table beside them were two guns. It was nearly 1 o'clock. Seaman, don't you hear something? Said the doctor suddenly. They listened. Yes, someone was turning the key of the front door. So slowly and quietly, they went out of the room, carrying their guns. The big front door stood wide open. Moonlight fell on a white thing standing on the doorstep. Who's there? Cried the doctor. The white thing turned around. It was Heidi in her white night dress. She looked very afraid as the two guns pointing at her. So it's our little Swiss girl, cried Mr. Seaman in great surprise. What are you doing here, child? I don't know, Heidi said in a strange voice. She's walking in her sleep, the doctor said. Leave her to me, I'll put her to bed. He carried her up to the bedroom and laid her on the bed. You are all right now, he said. Now tell me, child, where did you want to go? I thought I was at home in grandfather's little house, and I could hear the wind in the fir trees, and I wanted to see the stars in the sky. So I ran to the door and opened it. The same thing happens every night. But when I wake up, I'm still in Frankfurt. Are you happy in Frankfurt? He asked. Heidi didn't answer. The doctor went on. And where's your grandfather's house? In the mountains. It's so beautiful. And I want so much to. She began to cry quietly. Go to sleep now, child. Tomorrow everything will be right. The doctor left her. The child is walking in her sleep because she's unhappy, he told Mr. Seaman. She wants to go home. Didn't you see how thin and white she is? Unhappy? Cried Mr. Seaman. Thin white in my house? And nobody has noticed it. You must send her home at once. But I can't send her back to her grandfather like this, said Mr. Seaman. We must make her well again first and then send her. No, said the doctor. It's dangerous to wait. She must go tomorrow. At the first light of day, Mr. Seaman called Miss Romer and all the servants to the dining room. They thought he wanted to tell them about the ghost, but he said nothing about ghosts. He told them that Heidi was going on a journey. Miss Romer, please put the child's thing into a big box. Sebastian, go and bring the young woman Detta from the house where she works. John, see to the carriage and the horses. Tinette, wake Heidi and dress her. He hurried off to tell Clara what was happening. Poor Clara was very sad to hear that she must lose her little friend. But her father told her that next summer she could go to Switzerland herself to see Heidi. Then Heidi's box was brought into Clara's room so that she could put in some of her nice dresses for Heidi. Sebastian came back with Jetta. Mr. Seaman told her about Heidi's trouble. I want you to take her home to her grandfather today, he said. Oh, I'm sorry, said Jetta quickly. I can't do that. We are much too busy today, and tomorrow too, and I can't the next day. I see, said Mr. Seaman shortly. He sent it away and told Sebastian that he must make the journey with Heidi. And he wrote a letter for Heidi's grandfather. He called Heidi to the dining room. Well, what do you say to this? He asked her. She looked at him in surprise. Tinette had woken and dressed her without saying a word. You don't know you're going home today? Home? Her face turned white. Don't you want to go? Oh, yes, I do. Was it really true? She ran up to Clara's room. Clara showed her the things she had put in the box. And gave her a basket. In it were 12 white rolls for grandmother. Heidi put her big book in it too. Now the carriage was ready, and the girls had to say goodbye. There was no time to be sad. Heidi and Sebastian climbed into the carriage. The carriage took them to the train, and the train took them to Basel, where they stayed in a hotel for nights. Then another slower train took them from the town of Manfield. From here, they were going to walk to Dorfly. Sebastian was uncertain about this part of the journey. He was afraid of mountains and didn't like long walks. He asked the way from a man who was putting some big bags into a cart. Dorfly, I'm going to there myself, said the man. I can take the child and her box. Sebastian was very pleased. He gave Heidi the letter of grandfather and a small bag. This is a present from Mr. Seaman. Look after it carefully. Put it inside the basket under the rolls. As the cart came nearer and nearer to Dorfly, Heidi became more and more excited. She could see the elm in front of her now, and all the mountains. When they reached the village, she thanked the driver and jumped down with her basket. Grandfather will get the box, she said. She hurried up the hillside, thinking only one thing. Is grandmother still alive? She reached Goat Peter's house and stopped at the door. She was afraid to go in, but now she was inside, and a voice called from the court. Dear Goat, that was like a Heidi's footstep. Who is it? But it is Heidi, grandmother. She threw her arms around her. Grandmother put her hand on the child's head. Yes, it's her hair and her voice. Oh, thank God. I brought you some nice white bread, said Heidi, and put the rolls on grandmother's knees. Wonderful, and so many. She felt them one by one. But you brought me something better than bread. You. I must go on to grandfather, said Heidi after some time. I'll come again tomorrow. She climbed on up there. First, she saw the tops of the old fir trees, and then the roof of the house, and then the house itself. And there was grandfather sitting on the seat. Grandfather, grandfather, she cried, and ran to him. They couldn't speak for some time. Did they send you away? He said at last. Oh no, they were very good to me, but I wanted so much to come home to you. Oh, there's a letter, There's a letter for you. She gave grandfather the letter to read, and the little bag from Mr. Seaman. He looked in the bag. This is money for you, a lot of money. Put it in the cupboard. They went inside, and Heidi ran all over the room. Then she went up the steps. Oh, where's my bed in the hay? It's not there anymore. It will soon be there again. Now, come and have some milk. Heidi drank until her bowl was empty. Nothing in the world is good as her milk, she said. From outside, there came the sound of many running feet. Heidi jumped up and ran out to the goats. Peter was behind them. Good evening, Peter, she called, but he just stood there with his mouth open, while Heidi talked to the goats. Are you back then? He said at last, and came and took her hand. That's good. He went down the hillside with a very happy face. Heidi's bed in the hay was ready now. She thanked God for bringing her home and went to sleep. There was no sleepwalking that night. Chapter 30. Heidi Can Help. Next day, Heidi went to see grandmother. Grandfather went down the hillside with her. He had a big basket to carry the things from Heidi's box. He couldn't carry the box itself. Grandmother was very happy to talk to Heidi. Did you like the rolls? Heidi asked her. Oh, they're so good. I can really bite into them, not like a hard black bread. I feel stronger today after eating them. If only we had a bit more money. The man in Joffrey made those rolls too, but they cost much more than the black bread. Money? Said Heidi. I've got a lot of money. Mr. Seaman gave it to me. Peter can buy you a roll every day, grandmother, and two on Sundays. No, I can't take your money. Suddenly, I noticed grandmother's old songbook. I can read now, she said. Shall I read you a song? Oh, yes, please. Can you really read? I read out a song about the sun. As grandmother listened, her face changed. Heidi had never seen look her so happy. Oh, Heidi, she said, that has done me good and makes it light inside me. Read it again. Now, grandfather was outside, and Heidi had to go. Heidi told him about her plan to buy rolls for grandma. But Heidi, you could use your money to buy a real bed for yourself, he said. Oh, I don't want a real bed. I want grandmother to have her rolls. Oh, I'm so glad God has shown me a way to help her. Grandfather looked at her strangely. Who taught you about God, Heidi? Clara's grandmama. She taught me to pray every night. Do you pray to God, grandfather? Never. I don't think about God, and God doesn't think about me. I can't go back to him now. Oh, yes, you can. If you want to go back to God, he will forgive you. Grandmama said so. That evening, when Heidi was asleep, grandfather went outside. He looked up at the stars and prayed to God to forgive him. The next day was Sunday. When Heidi got up, she could hear the sound of bells from the church down in the road. Put a nice dress on, said grandfather. We are going to church. She looked at him in great surprise, then ran to dress. The church was full when they got there, and they sat down in the back. But soon everyone in the church knew that Al Morpo was there. He has changed his way at last, they said in wonder. It's the child who has done it. Chapter 40. Winter in Dorothy. Grandfather was ready now to send Heidi to school, but in the winter she could not go down to the village. There was too much snow. The best thing was to take a house in Joffrey. Grandfather found an old house near the church. Some of the rooms had no roof, and others had holes in it. But grandfather was good at mending things. He made 3 rooms ready to use, and another big room for the goats. At the beginning of the winter, they all moved in. Next week, the snow came. At Goat Peter's house, there was snow up to the windows, but the snow didn't stop Peter from going to Joffrey. He could go anywhere on his sledge. So every day his mother sent him off to school. But very often Peter didn't go to school. He played in the snow, and after school he came to see Heidi. Heidi couldn't go to see grandmother until the snow became hard. Then Peter took her. The chair by the spinning wheel was empty. Mother's ill, Brigitta said. She's in bed. Heidi didn't like to see grandmother in bed. Are you very ill? She asked. No, I can still eat your nice roll. Oh, the top of your bed goes down, said Heidi. Your feet are higher than your head. Yes, it's not a good bed, said grandmother sadly. Can you read me a song, please? As Heidi read, the happy look came to her face again. Heidi knew that she couldn't go to grandmother very often in the winter, but now she thought of a way to help her. Peter, she said next day, you are going to learn to read. I'm going to teach you. Peter didn't want to do it. But when Heidi got angry, he had to say yes. He came to the house after school every day, and they worked together with an old reading book of Clara's. After the lesson, Peter could eat with grandfather and Heidi. That was the best part. One evening, Peter went home and said, I can do it now. What can you do, dear? His mother asked. Read. I must read a song now, Heidi said. Brigitta gave him the songbook, and he read a song. Oh, that's wonderful, his mother said. His grandmother didn't say anything. At school next day, the teacher was even more surprised to hear Peter read. Why, Peter, you can read? Read well. However this happened, it was Heidi, said Peter. Every evening he read a song to grandmother, but it wasn't like Heidi's reading, because he left out all the hard words. Chapter 15. Clara Comes. The winter was over and Almopa and Heidi were back from the Alp. In June, a letter came from Clara which made Heidi very happy. Clara and Grandmama were staying not far from Dorfli at Ragaz, a town where people go to drink the water to get well. After that, they were coming to Dorfli. Isn't it wonderful? Heidi said to Peter. But Peter wasn't pleased. Heidi was his friend, and he didn't want her to have other friends. One morning, Heidi looked down and saw a strange party moving up slowly. First came two men carrying a seat between them with a girl in it. Then came a horse with a lady riding it. Then a man pushing an empty wheelchair. Soon, the travelers had reached the house, and Clara and Heidi were kissing each other with happy cries. The three men went down the hill again, taking the horse with them. Oh, how I love it here, Clara cried. Everything looked so beautiful in the clear sunlight. The mountains and the trees and the grass and the flowers. Almopa put her in her wheelchair and Heidi pushed it round the house. She wanted her to see the old fir trees and smell them and hear the wind singing in them. Then Almopa got the food ready. He brought the table and chairs outside so that they could sit and look at the mountains as they ate. Clara and Grandmama loved this dining room under the blue sky. Clara finished her hot cheese and asked for another piece. At home, she never wanted more. All afternoon, the girls sat under the fir trees and talked. Grandmama and Almopa were soon talking like old friends too. Then Clara wanted to see inside the house. The wheelchair was too wide for the door, so Almopa carried her in her strong arms. He even carried her up the steps to Heidi's bedroom. How I would love to sleep here, she cried. Why not? Said Almopa to Grandmama. I'm sure the mountain air would be good for her, and I can take care of her, you know. Grandmama looked at Clara's excited face and thought that this was a very good plan. So Grandmama went back to Ragaz alone. Clara was to stay 4 weeks on the Alp. Now I shall meet Peter and the goats, said Clara. But when Peter came, he didn't speak to them. He didn't want to meet Heidi's friend. Grandfather milked Snowy and Brownie and brought a bowl of milk for each goat. Clara had never had goat's milk, and she smelled it before trying. But in the end, she drank it all. After that, it was time to go to their haybeds. Chapter 16. Something wonderful happens. Clara had never been so happy. She and Heidi were in the open air all day. She ate a lot and slept well, and soon she began to grow stronger. When Almopa carried her down to her chair, he said, Now try to stand on the ground. Clara tried. This made her legs hurt, but every day she stood for a little longer. Heidi wanted very much to show Clara the place up the mountain where the goats went. At last, Almopa said he would push her up in the chair. That evening, as Peter went past with the goats, Heidi called out to him, Peter, Peter, tomorrow we're coming with you, both of us. Peter looked angry and said nothing. He hated the girl from Frankfurt. All the time, Heidi was with her and not with him. When he reached the house next day, everyone was inside, but the wheelchair was outside, ready for Clara. Peter looked at it standing there, and suddenly he became very angry. He ran at it and pushed it as hard as he could down the hill. He saw it running down faster and faster. Then it turned over and broke into pieces. Peter laughed. Now that girl would have to go away. He ran up the hill. When Heidi and grandfather came out, they were surprised not to see the chair. Perhaps the wind has sent it down the hill, said Heidi. Can we get it back in time to go to see the place? If it has gone down the hill, we can't get it back at all, grandfather said. It must be broken into 100 pieces. Oh, now we can't go up to see the high place. And I shall have to go home. Oh, how terrible. Oh dear, oh dear. I'll carry you up there, grandfather said. He and Heidi got some food ready. When they reached the place, Peter was there with his goats. He was very surprised to see them, not at all pleased. Why didn't you call for Snowy and Brownie? Said Almoba angrily. There was nobody up. Did you see the chair? What chair? Said Peter. Grandfather looked at him and said no more. He put Clara down. Now I must go and look for that chair, he said. I'll come back for you this afternoon. Clara sat on the grass and looked at the blue, blue sky and all the snowy mountain tops. She had never seen anything so beautiful. Then she noticed the flowers near her. Oh, look at those blue ones. They are even bluer than the sky. There's a place near her where a lot of them grow, said Heidi. I'd like to go and look at it. Will you be all right alone? Of course, said Clara. Heidi was soon back. It's so lovely. You must see it, she said. I'll carry you. You can't carry me, Heidi, said Clara. You're much smaller than me. Heidi noticed Peter on the hillside. Peter, come down here, she called. He didn't move. She shouted again. If you don't come, I'll do something that you won't like at all. Peter was suddenly very afraid. Perhaps Heidi had seen him push the chair, and now she was going to tell Almopa. He came down quickly. We are going to take Clara to the place with the blue flowers. Now, Clara, put the one arm on me and one around Peter. That's better now. Clara was on her feet now, but Heidi was so much smaller than Peter. They really couldn't carry her. Move your foot, Clara, said Heidi. Now the other one. Clara took one slow step, then another, then another. I can do it, Heidi. I can do it, she cried. I'm walking. Clara and Heidi were so excited that they nearly fell down. But they kept going, and at last they were standing in front of the blue flowers. Clara looked in their rich dark blue faces. She knew that she would remember them as long as she lived. Chapter 17 Surprises. That evening, when Peter took the goats down to the doorbell, he saw a lot of people standing at the bottom of the hill, looking at something. It was the broken pieces of the wheelchair. Do you think it was really the wind? Said a woman. Well, if somebody pushed it, a man answered, he'll be really in trouble. Those things cost a lot of money. Perhaps the man from Frankfurt will send a policeman to find out what happened. Peter hurried away. His face was white. Clara was walking more and more every day. She wrote a letter to Grandmama asking her to come, but she didn't tell her about the walking. A letter came back from Grandmama. She was coming in 2 days' time. Peter brought the letter up from the orphanage. He pushed it into Almopa's hand and ran away. Peter's strange now, said Heidi. He's like the goats when they're afraid of his big stick. Perhaps she's afraid of my stick, said Almopa. He may have a good reason. When Grandmama came up the hill on her horse, Almopa, Heidi, and Clara were all sitting on the wooden seat. Clara, she cried. You're not in your chair, and you're not thin and white. Is it really you? Heidi and Clara stood up and began to walk slowly towards her. Now Grandmama really couldn't believe her eyes. She kissed Clara and Heidi and Clara again. Then she turned to Almopa and thanked him in a broken voice. My son must come at once, she cried. I'll send a telegram to Paris. How can I do that? I'll call Peter, said Almopa, and made a strange high sound which could be heard right up the mountain. Soon Peter came running down, and Almopa gave him the telegram to take to the orphanage. But Mr. Seaman wasn't in Paris. His business there was finished, and he had decided to give Clara a surprise. At this minute, he was walking up the elm from the orphanage. But when he saw a boy running down the hillside, he called, Boy, is this the way to Heidi's house? But the boy ran away. It was Peter. He knew who the strange man was, the policeman from Frankfurt. And as he ran, he fell over a stone and began to fall down the hillside, just like Clara said. He wasn't much hurt, but he lost the telegram. He went slowly up the hill. At Almopa's house, the strange man was talking to Clara. Peter tried to hurry past, but Almopa called, Come here, Peter. They were all looking at him. Suddenly, he couldn't go on hiding the terrible thing he had done. It wasn't the wind, it was me, he said. Oh, it's that strange boy who's afraid of everyone, said Mr. Sim. What does he mean? He's telling that he pushed Clara's chair down the hillside. Did he really do that? Said Mr. Sim. Then we should thank him for helping Clara. Peter couldn't believe his ears. The man wasn't angry with him. Was he even a policeman? Mr. Seaman turned to Almopa. I'm a rich man, but I couldn't buy the thing I wanted most. Now you've given it to me. How can I thank you? What can I give you, my friend? I have all I want, but one thing troubles me. When I die, Heidi will have no one. Can you look after her? But of course, Heidi is like a sister for Clara. Now, Heidi, is there something you would like? Yes, please, said Heidi quickly. A bed for Peter's grandmother, like my bed in Frankfurt. We'll send her a fine bed. And said Grandmama, and good food and clothes for the winter. Oh, this is a wonderful day, cried Heidi. It's full of lovely surprises. Yes, said Mr. Seaman, looking at Clara today. I've had the best surprise I've ever had, all because of Almopa and Heidi. And our good mountain air, said Grandfather, and Snowy's good milk, said Heidi. Thank you. Hope you enjoyed this book. Let's meet in another